All right, everybody. So the title of this program is From Connoisseur to Sommelier, taking your cannabis knowledge to the next level with cannabis interpening. Excuse me. And, people wonder, well, what is interpening? Okay, so in order to answer that question, first I want you to understand that it's pronounced interpening, not interpining or interpening or anything like that. Or it's a combination of the words interpreting and terpenes. And that was a phrase that was coined, or a word that was coined by Mr. Max Montrose of the Trichome Institute, who designed this program. And I was fortunate enough to work with Max and be the director of operations for a couple of years. And when I left the company, they were kind enough to grant me a license to teach this stuff in the Midwest. So that's what I do. Now, whether or not there's a need for interpening is something else we're going to talk about. And then finally, we'll look at interpening through the lens of bud structure, which is one of probably a dozen different things we look at in the interpening process. So for those of you who don't know, a sommelier is someone who's really trained and knowledgeable wine professional. They specialize in all aspects of wine service, wine and food pairing. They can drink wine, smell wine, and tell you all about it, where it's from, whether or not that was a good year, who the producer is, those kinds of things. So that's kind of what interpening is. It's the art of the cannabis sommelier. We use sight and scent to gauge cannabis safety, quality, and indica sativa ratio in order to predict the psychotropic effects before we consume. This leads to a lot of really cool opportunities. Like I only got to work at the Trichome Institute because I passed that test and they liked me and who I was and what I was doing. So they brought me on board and I got the chance to work with them. And, that door only opened because, I took the class. Now, I'm not saying taking this class is going to get you a job in the industry, but it's going to give you a lot of really good background and understanding of the cannabis plant to be able to discuss it in a way that's going to impress just about anybody. Now, one of the opportunities that I've gotten to continually have as a result of this is being a Trichome Assurance grader, which is really, really fun. I get to go to places like Oregon, and they also go to California. It happens in Colorado. And I'm one of the 4 or 5 people that grade all the cannabis for the Dope Cup, for the Dope Magazine Dope Cup. And, we're talking like having a week to grade, 150 kinds of flower, 100 kinds of concentrate, and 80 kinds of edibles. And, we always need more people to do that because it's really hard. And, as you can see, like here I am, like checking them all out, lining them up, taking my notes. And just as much time as I spend smoking and packing, I spend writing and taking notes and doing data entry, and it's a real legit thing. Dope Magazine actually tries to trick us every year, and they stick a sample in multiple categories and see what the grades are. And this year we had one sample that ended up in 3 different categories, and 3 different people graded it, and the percentage difference between them was less than 2%. So that just goes to show that our techs are able to look at cannabis through the same lens, and that's why interpening is such an important skill. You got your beer cicerones, your cheesemongers, your wine sommeliers, your coffee cuppers, right? None of these things take safety and medicinal effect into account. And knowing the indica to sativa spectrum and understanding that there's a sedative to uplifting scale there is really, really important when deciding what kind of cannabis to consume. You pretty much know that coffee is going to lift you up and beer is going to sedate you eventually when you consume it. And that's not part of that art. So we're a little bit art, a little bit science, and I think just as valuable, if not more valuable than any of these other disciplines. So thanks for taking some time to learn about it here with me today. So the reason that interpening is really around is because of the strain name dilemma. So how do we know that this is Purple Dream, right? Because that's what the label says. How do we know? And really, there's no way to know. Unfortunately, the black market for decades forced growers underground, so cultivators were really secretive. They didn't want to share things necessarily. There was a lot of misinformation. People would lie about what variety types they had so they could sell them more easily, things like that. And the result of that underground line of growing is that, you know, we have a very distinct group of cannabis genetics that are everywhere. There's hundreds and hundreds of strains, right? And they're all arguably different from one another. But the problem is that there's no real such thing as like a seed line or a strain line. And we'll look a little bit at phylogenetics to learn a little bit more about that later. But, you know, unfortunately, the cannabis plants that are in the industry, in the legal industries, had to come from somewhere. And more often than not, you know, the first cuts came from illegal cannabis grows, and whatever they were called is what name got brought into the industry. And whether or not that name was right is hard to tell. You know, we've found out about 30% of the time strains are mislabeled. So, you know, besides just the fact that we had to do this whole thing underground for decades, further complications include things like cannabis morphology, counterfeiting, and also the law. And so what cannabis morphology is basically the nature versus nurture argument, right? So if you have genetically identical strains and you grow them in different environments, they're going to express themselves differently and look like different buds. Now, the variation might not be this extreme. This is an illustration of the concept, right? However, if you look them up on Instagram, I'm working on getting some images from them right now. There's a contest that happens in Denver. It's called the Grow Off. And basically, 40 different growers all get a clone from the same plant. And they're all given the opportunity to grow the cannabis. And they have an image with all 40 buds. And some of them look wildly different from one another, and you can like essentially tell like they're all in a family, right? But some are short, some are tall, some are fat, some are skinny. It's just like a family, and everyone's different when you really look at them. And so that's what happens on the nurture side. You know, all these growers had the exact same genetics, and because they put them through different grow conditions, different nutrient cycles, what have you, the plants turned out different. Additionally, you know, like I said, people will lie about their strain names. So back in the day, in 2009, in a dispensary in Colorado, the way that cannabis got brought into a dispensary was some guy with a backpack full of bud would stop in and ask the bud tender if he wanted to buy his cannabis, and they would negotiate a price right there and pay it in cash. And whatever the guy called it is what it was. And if the dispensary worker didn't like the name of it, sometimes they would just rename it. You know, and then let's say there's a seed in one of them and somebody thinks that, you know, that's the name of that seed. And so they start growing it when really it was, you know, whatever plant that plant actually was hybridized with some other plant that was in the guy's grow. And, you know, it's like, that's why there's this whole mishmash. So people were willing to do things like that, change names to get more accountability and more accessibility to selling their product. And that happens in every industry. I mean, it's $461 billion industry is fake fashion. So if people are willing to fake purses and things like that, all you have to do is change the name of a strain. You don't have to build anything separate. Like, it's going to happen as well. So just be on the lookout for that. So what can be done? What can be done to solve this problem? Well, some people are applying for legal protection for their genetics, right? You got like the people like Gorilla Glue, who unfortunately did get in a little trademark name issue with the, you know, adhesive company. But people are getting legal protection for their genetics. So they're going to be able to say like, hey, that strain that you're growing, the DNA of that is identical to one that I've protected. I don't know how you got that, but you're not allowed to grow that. So that's coming. And one of the tools that people are using to do that, whether they like it or not, is Phylos Bioscience. I highly recommend everybody check out phylosbioscience.com. They are doing some really cool things. They are taking samples of cannabis and creating a map of the data. And we'll look at that in a second. Now, what can we do? Now, if you're fortunate enough to shop for cannabis in a state that has cultivators featured as behind the strain name. So when you go to a dispensary, it's like, oh, well, this was grown by so-and-so and it's called blah, blah, blah. If you find that strain by that cultivator in another store or later at that store, a different time of the year, you can rest assured it's probably going to be a pretty similar experience. Now, if you find that strain name and it's a different cultivator, or they don't label cultivators and they don't tell you that they got it from the same guy or whatever, I wouldn't be so sure. That's why we teach interpening. So this is a, a skill set that'll allow you to hone in on seeing and smelling cannabis and being able to identify it. You know, we teach you what to look for, how to look for it, and what the sights and scents mean in terms of what that cannabis is going to do to you. So to make things easy, I am going to escape out of this. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to share you guys the video this way. We're going to watch it. All right, so can everyone hear this video?
So if you go online, it's just this three-dimensional map. You can zoom around in it, you can play with it, you can search for things, and now different growers and different dispensaries have their own constellations in there. Some dispensaries are finally starting to send letters to their suppliers saying, if you want to have stuff in our store, you have to get it tested because we want our patients to know what they're getting. So the idea was kind of that we would be able to build this huge data set and answer some really difficult questions if we could solve a market problem, if we could create a demand for consistency or meet the demand for consistency. And it's working. People are sending us tons of samples. Those samples aren't the rare, interesting ones. They're the industry samples. And so we're trying to tease apart all that mess. And the bigger the data set gets, the more we can tell people with certainty what they really have. These are just the names that everything came in with. We can see that at least 30% of the names are wrong or nonsensical, but people are already starting to log on and change the names. People send us samples of different things often, and we find out that actually they have the same thing. People are using it to settle disputes even, which I'm not sure how I feel about, but you can definitely do kind of a, you know, like a DNA paternity test and figure out, you know, if your buddy really took a cutting from you and is selling it in Washington State or not. You can figure that out. So one problem with this data inherently is that it's just complicated data. So if you zoom in on certain parts of the galaxy and you turn on all the relationship lines, you can't even see some of the names. Like, it's so dense. Like, this is the actual data. The dots are separated by genetic distance. The lines are first degree relationships, either parent-child or sibling-sibling. And there's so many varieties that it's such a tangle. And the reason for that is that there's no such thing as a strain. So people talk about seed lines and clonal lines. And there are clonal varieties. If you have a plant that's good and you take cuttings from it, all of those cuttings will be genetically identical. That's a variety. But in normal agriculture, people have made genetically stable plants. And all our children are the same. No one's ever done that for cannabis. So when you cross a male and a female cannabis plant, the seeds that you get are unique individuals, just like all of us. They are as different from each other as you are from your siblings. So all of these dots are individuals. They're not strains. It's just one plant. It's genetically, so every plant is its own special snowflake with its own crazy chemical diversity. So it's just a really, really complicated data problem. So here in Israel, as we learned in the last couple of days, they have this weird insistence on doing things correctly. And so they actually are doing experiments to figure out what's in the plant and how does it work. We can't do that in the United States because research is still basically illegal. So what we're doing is collecting tons and tons of data. We're comparing it with patient data and chemical data. There's this massive nationwide experiment going on, and hundreds of thousands of people are using this plant. So ultimately, we're going to be able to not just figure out what are you smoking, but we're going to be able to figure out what genes control what traits, and ultimately, we're going to be able to figure out what genes and traits are related to what patient outcomes by mining all that data. And that's it.
guys. So that's Philos Bioscience. Those guys are great. I really love what they're doing. Let's see. Let's get back to the webinar here. All right. So you can see why there is a need for interpening. And to let you in on the first little piece of interpening, which is going to be bud structure, we're going to kind of take a little trip through cannabis plant basics. So we're going to talk about leaf structure and how that's a result of growing environment. And then we'll also talk about plant structure and how that's a result of growing environment in 2 different ways. Then we'll talk about nodal spacing as a result of the plant structure, and then bud structure, which is a result of nodal spacing. So if you look at this map, you can kind of see where cannabis comes from around the world. And ruderalis is really the putative ancestor of cannabis as we know it today. And that comes from way up north, and it's kind of the redheaded stepchild of cannabis because it's an auto-flowering variety. And it's one that will flower after about 6 weeks regardless of lighting conditions. Then you got your sativas and your indicas. And sativas are really coming from more arid, open, mountainsides, desert type places, while indicas are coming from more of the jungles and the tropics. And what that had the effect of doing was having some plants like indicas that, you know, they're fighting for light because they're under this canopy of all these other plants. And so they had to have these big, broad leaves that would catch as much light as possible. Versus the sativas that were way out in the open, they were just getting bombarded with light, and, you know, they didn't need as much like surface area to collect enough light for photosynthesis to do what the plant needed to do. That's how growing environment can determine, you know, leaf shape. Similarly, buds or plant structure, if you look here, you know, you got sativas, really tall, open, wispy, and indicas, really bushy and compact. And, you know, that's because indicas came from places where there are lots of other plants around and they didn't have room to grow and stretch out. Same thing with sativas. You know, they came from places where they had room to grow and stretch out, and they weren't competing for space, and, you know, they had a little more room to operate. As you can see a little closer, the nodal spacing, which is the places of the branches, each branch space is another opportunity for cannabis buds to grow. And the more closely placed the nodal spacings are, the less room there is for buds to grow between them. So on a sativa plant on the right, where there's a lot more room for nodal spacing, the buds would be able to stretch out and be open and more wispy. And on the left, where you got the indicas, the nodal spacing is really tight. And so the buds are dense and compact and round. And, you know, I want to show you through a series of pictures of cannabis that I've got here and show you how they change going across the spectrum. And really, you know, the spectrum is not that big. Once you get attuned to it, it seems bigger, but these are kind of shades of green, okay? And so you got to be keen-eyed to be able to do this. So indicas, nice and dense and round. Indica dominance, still really dense, turning a little more conical. You know, hybrids, these things are starting to be more conical. They're starting to be a little more open. You can see that there's a little more space in between the buds and where the calyxes are put together. Then you get into the sativa dominance, even more open, even more conical in shape. And then finally the sativas, really open, really stretching, really reaching, super open bud structure. And just to go through that again, you can see them get rounder and denser or more open as we go. So like here's the indicas, indica dominance, hybrids, sativa dominance, and sativas. So, you know, that's one way that we identify cannabis. Now, bud structure, in addition to being able to determine the indica-sativa ratio and hence being able to determine the psychotropic effects, can also be a really important quality thing for us to look at. So seeing cannabis that's malformed can be a sign that it was really stressed out in the growing process. So, you know, stresses can include lighting, temperature, humidity changes, carbon dioxide levels, nutrients of that are being fed to it, the soil mix, insects, diseases, and more. There's a whole lot of things that can place the plant under stress. And some stress is good because, you know, the plant is producing trichomes, which are producing cannabinoids and terpenes for our enjoyment to fight off predators and fight off, stresses. But too much stress is bad because then it takes away from that energy and the plant is just basically breaking down. So faulty bud structure is something that we want to look at, as opposed to those really nicely formed buds that we were looking at before, like really nicely formed, right? Everything's pretty beautiful. This one looks kind of open. This is like a really, really, really landrace sativa. This is a very interesting strain. It's called Tylites. It's from Illinois. But you can see how they're all, well-formed buds compared to on the left here. We had a bud that couldn't even hold itself together after it cured. I mean, that was a bud at one point, and it was just so poorly built, poorly put together. There's so much stress on the plant that it fell apart once it dried up. And on the right, slightly less drastic, but you can see it's just like really weird. There's like this foxtailing on the left, and they're not like conical shape or round like they're supposed to be. So just some things to look at. And if you want to come out to class, we'd love to have you. Level 1 Interpening is a really fun program. It's going to be like 3 hours. You're going to get a 42-page book. You're going to get the weed wheel. You're going to get the interpener's loop, which I can show you here in a second. We're also going to talk about, strain name dilemma, cannabis basics, all these different things. We're going to cover all of this in the class. And pretty much everyone that's come through has really, really appreciated the knowledge, whether they are a complete beginner or someone who's been growing for 20 years. And level 1 is a prerequisite for level 2. So if you want to go out to Colorado and take the practical examination where you have to see and smell the differences between 10 jars of cannabis for an exam, that's something I can help you get prepared for. So a little gift for you guys. It's a $200 class. 10% off is $20 with the code webinar10. We're 12-1, 12-2, and 12-3. And in Ypsilanti, Lansing, and Greengate Health. Lansing actually is going to be at 3 p.m., not at 11 a.m. It's at 3 p.m., and that's reflected on our website. And then I've got my upcoming Illinois classes as well. Really hoping to do some fun things at the Grassroots event on 12/23. So, register today, cannabiseducation.co/enroll. We are limiting seats. We are hoping to keep it kind of intimate, so this will sell out. And if you have any questions about it, I'm going to be hanging out, like I said, doing the Q&A. If you're interested in sponsoring or hosting a class, just let me know. cannabiseducationco@gmail.com, or you can hit up Miss Jamie Cooper of the Canna Media Works at jamie.goswick@gmail.com. So that is the presentation, guys. I'm going to stop the screen share now. Let's move on to Q&A. So if y'all want to just type in the webinar chat or use the Q&A feature, you can feel free to do that. I'm going to grab the tools that you get with the class and show them to you. Okay, guys. So first tool that I like to talk about is the weed wheel. This kind of shows, the scent, bud structure, leaf structure, and physical effects of like sativas to indicas and everything in between. And this is just a lot of fun to have. You can compare buds to it, see where they fall on the spectrum. We've also got the interpening loop. Now this thing's really cool. This thing helps you gauge indica sativa ratio on the front, and then it helps you gauge quality on the back, or on the second page, excuse me. Open it again, it helps you gauge the unacceptable characteristics. Open it one more time, and it talks a little bit about some terpenes, and then you open it again, and it comes back to the front. So this thing's pretty cool. Then I've got the 42-page interpening guidebook. This is kind of the Bible for the program. So, there's Max. He's pretty funny dude. He's got his own little cartoon. It talks about where cannabis comes from. We talk a little bit about terpenes and cannabinoids. We get into some of the bad stuff like bugs. And, then we talk about how to do the interpening methodology and the identifying factors of all the different variety types: indica, indica dominant, sativa, sativa dominant, and hybrid, and a little bit about terpenes, things like that. So It comes with a really, really great presentation. We have a ton of awesome pictures to illustrate some of the things we're talking about. I'll also have food grade non-cannabis terpenes, isolated terpenes, so that we can smell some like myrcene, limonene, linalool, get our noses in them and learn about the smell technique. So that's the webinar. That's what I had for you guys. I hope you liked it. I hope you come to class. I'd love to have you. The floor is open to questions. I'm going to be available for about a half an hour. Don't hesitate to ask any questions. And whatever I can do for you, I'm happy to. Colin, what's the difference between THC and THCA? And why are terpenes a big thing now? I heard they can be bad for your health. Colin, some really good questions, man. Okay, so when cannabis grows on the plant, there are trichomes. And in those trichomes, they are the powerhouses for the growth of cannabinoids. The form that THC is in while it is growing on a live plant is THCA. It's an acidic form. That is not psychoactive. That does not get you high. So if you were to eat raw cannabis flower, you would not get up an effect of feeling high. What needs to happen is a process called decarboxylation, and that happens through heat and or time. Now with time, it takes forever to decarboxylate THCA into delta-9 THC. And as a matter of fact, most of it goes to CBN if you let it happen through time alone. But if you light it on fire to smoke it, you are going to break that acid molecule, the carboxyl group, off of the THC molecule, and it's going to become delta-9 THC, which is the psychoactive version that we really like. The cool thing about THC also is that when we bake it, you know, that's how it becomes active for edibles. And then when you eat it, your body actually converts it into another form of THC called 11-hydroxy-THC. And that's a really fun one because it can act up to 10 times stronger and 10 times longer lasting than the equivalent amount of delta-9 THC. Now, terpenes aren't just a big thing now. They always have been. People are just becoming more aware of them. If you're aware of aromatherapy, then you're aware of the power of terpenes. So if there's a morning facial scrub and it's citrus, there's a reason for that. It's because citrus is uplifting. And if there's a nighttime bubble bath and it's lavender, it's sedating. And there's a reason for that, because the chemicals, the terpenes, and all scent is just, you know, groups of terpenes and little terpene recipes. All scent is just little groups of terpenes. So those chemicals have pharmacological value. Now, there's some big hullabaloo, you know, about vape pens and adding in terpenes and whether or not they're native to the cannabis plant or they come from another plant, whether or not they're food grade or organic or safe, or whether they're synthetic terpenes or whatever. And that's where you start getting into some of the murkiness, right? On the whole, I would say as they're naturally occurring, terpenes are not really bad for your health. You know, I mean, I wouldn't go into getting a whole bunch of the terpenes, you know, that come from human waste and just like smelling poo all day or something like that. But that'll probably be bad for your health. I'm not sure. I wouldn't, you know, I know that ingesting terpenes in large amounts is not enjoyable, and large amounts is like a drop from a dropper is a large amount of terpenes. Like a drop from a dropper can probably flavor, you know, over a gram of concentrates. So yeah, that is terpenes and THC and THCA. And if you have anything that I touched on in there, Colin, that you'd like me to elaborate on, feel free to type another question. Now, somebody using a Samsung Galaxy S7 is asking, when a seed is first budding, how can you tell if it's sativa or indica? Okay, so you can't tell when it's first budding. And the way you can really start to tell is when you can start to see the fan leaves and when it's a little more mature. This is definitely going to happen before the flowering stage. You're going to notice in vegetative stage. There's also, now that things like phylos are happening, like if you were in the state of Oregon or could somehow get your product to the state of Oregon, I don't condone doing anything illegal though. You can get it genetically tested and see what it is, from the time that it's got a leaf. You can take that DNA, you can get DNA from that. So that would be the earliest way you could tell. What's more important, I think, is if you are growing from seed, is identifying whether or not it's a male or a female. And if you're growing multiple plants at the same time, getting the males out of there so you don't pollinate your ladies and get seeds in your bud. Can you reverse Delta-9 THC to THCA in a saponification process? Joan, that is an incredible question. I am not sure at all. I don't know why you would want to do that, because the THCA is naturally occurring. There are people that are starting to capitalize on THCA for its own benefits. I would look to a company like Mary's Nutritionals or Mary's Medicinals. I know that they have a THCA powder. I just don't know if it's available in your market. But THCA in and of itself is valuable, if you're going to eat it. It has some really similar properties to CBD. But the thing is that if you have a bunch of Delta-9 THC for whatever reason, which would be decarboxylated, THC isolate, turning it back into THCA would, I don't know. I mean, I would, if I wanted to dab it, then I would apply heat to it and it would decarb back to Delta-9. So I don't know if that's possible. I don't know what a saponification process is. I'm also not sure if it would be practical if it is possible. I lost my beetle friend. I don't know where it went. Didn't want to reverse it, but it did in making soap. And no one seems to know. That's really cool. Is saponification like a soap making process, like with like fat and lye and stuff like that? Yeah, no. I do not know. I'm not a chemist. I'm a cannabis enthusiast. I'm very well educated. I know some of the science, but I don't know about that. I would have to believe it has something to do with the ingredients in making soap. Probably the acid that you're using, if you're using one. Because I do know that CBD can be converted into THC with an acid bath. And if you eat CBD edibles, large amounts of CBD on an empty stomach, your body can convert it into THC and you can get high. So I do know that THC or these chemicals do change with certain chemicals applied to them. Is it true that tobacco can increase your high? Samsung Galaxy S7 user. Well, here's what I know about tobacco and cannabis. They've been going together forever. Europeans think we are crazy that we don't mix our tobacco or our cannabis with tobacco, that we smoke straight joints or just hash. They think we're nuts. Now, for me, I don't really like tobacco. I don't even like smoking blunts with a tobacco wrap. It disagrees with me. I feel sick. I get nauseous from tobacco. For some people, they really, really enjoy it. I would not be surprised if for some people there was a synergistic effect where the nicotine content in tobacco combined with the cannabinoids had a really positive experience, and had the subjective feelings of increasing the high. But for me, it's the exact opposite, and I feel sick and my high sucks and I want to throw up. So I got to believe that's kind of a user by user basis. And maybe it has to do with whether or not, you're a tobacco user. But that's the best I can offer on that question. Bonnie Diamond has her hand up. Bonnie, do you want to type into the chat box here? Do you want me to allow? I can allow you to talk. What's going on, Bonnie? Bonnie, if you can chat, I think I just your microphone is turned off. Unmute. Huh. Oh, there we go. Bonnie, can you hear me? Oh,
I can hear you.
Excellent. Hi, Bonnie. How are you doing? What's your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Pretty good. My question is, after your level 1 class, what does the level 2 entail?
Okay, so level 2 is held out in Colorado, in Denver at the Trichome Institute. But I believe that once Illinois or Michigan or someone in the Midwest has an adult use program, I'll be able to have level 2 out here as well. It just takes time to put together a growing kit, an interpening kit, excuse me. But level 2, basically you go out to Colorado and everything that I teach you in level 1, you get to actually have your hands on it and learn that whole thing again with the stuff in your hands. And then the test, there's 10 jars of cannabis that are put in front of you, and you're told the following information. 5 of these jars are unconsumable, and there's a problem with them. And some, there might be a mold, there might be male flower sites, there might be, faulty bud structures, it might be old. If there's a mold, you got to tell us what kind of mold it is. If it's old, you got to give us a guess at how old it is. If it's faulty structure, like why did it manifest itself? How did it manifest itself? And then the other 5 that you're told that are okay to consume, you're told one's an indica, one's indica dominant, one's 50-50, one's sativa dominant, and one's sativa. And basically, each jar is worth 6 points, and you got to earn 50 out of 60 points to pass and get your level 2 interpener's pin. And the reason that we want to have you go through level 1 first is because people that go into level 2 without really understanding what they're getting themselves into fail every time. And only about 10% of the people that take the level 2 test pass it, maybe 20%. So it's really, really difficult. And we want you to go through level 1 so that you can understand what you're getting yourself into, and you can practice at home and know that you're doing it right, so that when you go to the test, you're ready to go.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Bonnie. Anything else I can do for you?
No, I'm hoping to take the level 1 class.
Okay.
And see where we go from there.
Okay, well, remember to use the code webinar10 to get $20 off, all right?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, of course. I look forward to meeting you, Bonnie.
Forward to meeting you too. Do you also give classes on the West Coast?
No, I don't right now, but I do know some people out there that do some stuff like that. And if you'd like to talk to me about that separately, I'm happy to engage in that conversation with you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Is there
Yeah,
a
of course.
way to I can contact you back through the email that you sent?
Yeah, you know what? My company is called the Cannabis Education Company, and my email is just
Okay.
cannabiseducationco, at gmail.com. Or if you go to my
Perfect.
website, which is
Thank you very much.
cannabiseducation.co, you can find all my information there as well.
Thank you so much, Jeff. You have a good evening. I'm going to sign off now.
Yes, ma'am. Have a good night.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye. All right, Colin. Are the classes a prereq for possible jobs in the new and upcoming industry in Michigan, or is it just kind of like something to learn about cannabis? So, no, Colin, these are not a prerequisite for possible jobs. Okay, I want to be clear about that. This is not like, there's no job placement. This is not like going to ITT Tech where they have relationships with people and they can help you get a job as a mechanic. It is, however, a very valuable skill set. Okay. And if you take this seriously and you learn it and you pass the exam and you get that pin, you've got something to show people like, hey, I went through this class and here's what I learned. And not only do you have something to show them physically, your lapel pin, but you also now have the knowledge, vocabulary, and confidence to talk about cannabis in a way that's going to impress any potential employer. So I have this on my resume. I encourage people to put it on their resume. And it's something that for me did get me into the cannabis industry more fully. Like I had been in the cannabis industry, but if I'd not taken this test and passed it and made friends with the company that put the program together, they would have never given me a job. And then I wouldn't have ever been able to get a job managing a dispensary in Chicago. And then I wouldn't have had the confidence to go out and start my own business teaching this stuff and doing all these programs. And now I get asked to speak all around the country. I've spoken in Anchorage, Alaska, Boston, Massachusetts, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Denver, Colorado. I've been all over the place, and it's a lot of fun. And I love getting to talk about cannabis and spread good, accurate information. So you can be sure that what you learn from me is going to be state of the art, incredibly valuable, and give you the tools to talk to anybody you want about getting a job, and it'll help you. It is not something that is going to get you a job. It is not, something that really is super recognized. Like people are like, oh, that's from the Trichome Institute. Maybe some people will know. Some people might know, but it's not like a Harvard diploma, right? It is something to look at, though. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Colin. I'm glad you understand, man. It's now that being said, man, who knows? In 50 years from now, maybe this company, Trichome, and what I'm doing, maybe we grow enough that this is the standard. And one day people are going to recognize Interpening from the Trichome Institute as the way, right? Somebody had to start the wine sommelier program. It didn't just it wasn't always a part of wine. Like it came forth in the 20th century, right? So, yeah, we're hoping to be that one day. Yeah, just remember, guys, if you do want to sign up, webinar10 is the code. It's for 10%, $20 off the course, $200. I know it's not cheap. I can promise you, though, it's worth it. Actually, when I first took it, I paid $275 for it because that was the first one ever. I'd never seen it before. I thought it was amazing, and I took the class. But food for thought. That's just me. Whoa, hello, Beetle. You are back. This Beetle is back. I don't know. Maybe it's the warmth of my computer or something that is drawn to. Look at the Beetle. Guys, it's a miracle.